So let's start. The first thing I want to do is introduce the concept of pitch. Now, pitch is the highness or lowness of a sound. So if we listen to this note, so I'm looking at my screen and we see these stave lines or a staff line, and here's a note. And so the notes go up and down, pitches. So if the pitches go up, you'll hear them. Here, let's listen. So we can hear them going up and down. Okay, so what I want to do is I want to break down the different elements of what we're looking at here. So the first thing we're looking at is these 5 lines. So these 5 lines are the staff lines. And it is this grid that you can measure pitch. So when you think of music as a language, it's a written language, and it's fairly complicated because there's a lot of symbols. So we'll be looking at the different symbols and the terminology as well. Now, as I mentioned, the musical language is a language, and it uses an alphabet. But the musical alphabet consists of only A through G. So what'll happen is it will just keep rotating. So if you're counting up A, B, C, D, E, F, G, A, B, C, D, E, F, G, and if you're descending or going down, G, F, E, D, C, B, A, G, F, and it'll continue down. In fact, it takes me a little longer to count down if I'm not reading it. So that's the musical alphabet, and those determine the different pitches that are repeated over and over again. So the staff by itself doesn't have any meaning without the key or clef, and there are different clefs that assign the meanings to the letters. So we'll start with this clef right here is called a treble clef or G clef, because you can see it circles around this line right here. So therefore, I've placed that note on a G. All right, now in addition to the treble clef or the G clef, there are other clefs. The one that you see the most with a treble clef is called a bass clef or an F clef. And if we look right here, this is a bass clef or an F clef. Okay, so this clef puts 2 dots around this line, and so therefore that defines these lines. Okay, now generally when you see these 2 together, the treble clef and the bass clef together, they can be braced together as a pair, and so therefore this is also called the grand staff. So generally the grand staff is what an instrument like the piano looks at, so it could do both hands. So this upper staff is the right hand, and the lower staff is the left hand. And generally, you'll see a treble clef on the right hand and a bass clef on the left hand, even though it doesn't have to always stay like that. You can change it. Okay, let's go on to one last clef really quick. I mean, there are many clefs, but this grand staff, the treble clef, and the bass clef are the 2 main ones, and these are the ones I'll focus on. But the third clef I want to introduce you to is the Moveable C clef. Now, this third clef right here is a C clef. And what I mean by that is there's a note between called middle C. I'll show you all of these in a second. And so therefore, where these 2 lines meet, it's almost like a V, this middle note is C, so that would be a C. The one that we're looking at here is the alto clef. It's the one that's most common and used with a stringed instrument called a viola. But if you want to look at them from the bottom to the top, it's called a soprano clef. This one would be the mezzo soprano clef. This one would be the alto clef. This one's the tenor clef. And this one's the baritone clef. These clefs aren't used as often. And generally, it's the alto clef is the one that you'll use the most. When you're looking at, say, orchestra scores, it's between alto clef and tenor clef. These are the 2 most common you'll jump into. Anyways, so I'm not going to introduce these anymore. We can go through them together later. Let's focus back on the grand staff. All right, so back to the grand staff. Now we'll start with the treble clef. The easiest way to learn the lines and spaces of the treble clef are by coming up with these little word association games. But ultimately, you forget that, and then you just memorize the notes. Excuse me. But for now, we'll figure out the lines and spaces. So the first one we're going to do is this is the treble clef or G clef, so therefore this line is the G line. So if we go down in the musical alphabet, G and then F, here, let me light it up here. G and then F, E. So therefore this would be E, and then the next line is G that we know. The next line is A, well, let's count. E, F, G, after G is A, B, C, D, E, F. So the line here, let's clear this. Let's make it look pretty. There we go. So the lines of the treble clef is E, G, B, D, F. And when I was a kid, it was every good boy does fine, but I think we can do better. So I would say that every great beer doth froth. And you'll have to come up with your own that is meaningful. Let's do the lines of the bass clef. So the lines of the bass clef, again, the bass clef or F clef denotes that line. So if we're going to go down to the bottom, if we count backwards or down on the musical alphabet, F, E, D, C, B, A, and then reversing to G. So the first line is G, then A, B, C, D, E, F, G, A. All right. Okay, so these are the lines of the bass clef. So G, B, D, F, A. When I was a kid, it was good boys do fine always, but I think something more epic would be good burritos don't fall apart, and that's true. All right, so those are the lines of the treble and bass clef. Let's do spaces. Okay, so if G is this G line, let's let that one back up again. So that's G. Go down one, it's F, F, G, A, B, C, D, E. And then this one we don't need anymore because there's only 4 spaces, not 5. So F, A, C, E, or face. Yeah? All right. And then in the bass clef, the bottom line is G, right? Good burritos don't fall apart, or great burritos. So G going up becomes A, B, C, D, E, F, G. And then we can delete that one. So therefore A, C, E, G. When I was a kid, it was all cows eat grass. And then later I learned all cars eat gas. But we can come up with something a little bit more fun. Anyway, so those are the lines and spaces of the treble clef. Okay, last thing I want to go over is ledger lines. Ledger lines extend the staff. So we can see the staff is 5 lines, but if we need to go above, then you'll see a line appears. And we need to go further still, another line. And so these lines extend the staff up or down, and that's a lower ledger line. Okay, so therefore these are the ledger lines connected to the treble clef, and then these are the ledger lines connected to the bass clef, right? So when we were talking about the alto clef or the middle C clefs, those were middle C. So middle C here, let's delete all these. If we're going to do this F goes down to E, then lower than E is D, and lower than D is C. Now in the treble clef, this C is called middle C. Now here, let's go to the bass clef. Let's clean this one up. Goodbye, 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 goodbye. We'll go to here. So remember, this is the bass clef or F clef. If we go up from F, F, G, A, B, C. And so therefore this C is also on a ledger line. Notice that these ledger lines are equidistant, right? They're all connected. And what's fascinating is that this C is middle C. This C is middle C. And they're the same note, but they're shown differently on the clefs. Okay, so what we learned is what a staff is, the 5 lines, the musical alphabet, A through G, We learned the treble clef, as well as the lines and spaces of treble clef, lines and spaces of bass clef, and we learned a movable C clef. In addition to that, we learned ledger lines to extend the notes above or below the staff lines. Okay, in part 2, we're going to learn about octave designations. We're going to learn about accidentals and harmonics, all that fun stuff. Okay, so thank you. I'll see you part 2. Bye.